All right, our next project is digital painting. So, what's amazing about painting within Photoshop is now with customizing brushes and using layers and being able to select colors from existing objects in Photoshop, digital painting can be as simple as digital coloring without the line work. So here we have basically our last assignment, assignment 7, the spot illustration, and assignment 8, the text logo type solution that goes with the spot illustration. But notice that there's no outline here for anything. And maybe this was done just like the spot illustration, but then the outline was removed, or maybe it was built up just from shapes. Same thing here, we have an illustration, a spot illustration, a logo type, but the outline here has been replaced. So we have a color hold, a blue line color hold, and an orange line color hold. Now that and this still looks like digital coloring, still looks like there's an implied or real outline around the shapes. But when you actually look at painters' sketchbooks, you'll see individual strokes, and they're not colored behind an outline, rather they're colored usually on top of some sort of sketch. And then slowly the paint strokes overtake the sketch entirely. And that's more what the technique of digital painting is. So we're so used to seeing digital painting effects, full spectrum color or softened edged, this is duotone, soft edge color, behind clean outlines like this vector outline. But what happens when you take that outline away completely is you just have the form, and that form has colors of different values, and then it also has edge control that matters, going from hard edge to soft edge. And the hard edges are where you actually see the contours and the overlaps between the forms, because you don't have an outline to make those distinctions for you. So there's no such thing as hard-edged or soft-edged digital painting. You need both in order to make an illusion of form. And that said, you can do it with all kinds of different stylizations as well. So photorealism is not the only way to go when you're doing digital painting. And I want you to explore those ideas. There are artists that even do digital painting within Illustrator, overlaying multiple gradation shapes, but not coloring behind an outline. There are some that take it incredibly in very much a sketching way, in a speed painting way, where the end result doesn't need to look fully finished, but is all about kind of the attitude of the brush strokes, more of an impression. And there are some that just really, really use the techniques of digital painting to fully refine every texture and the light source and make everything look equally interesting. So with all these different examples, how are you going to show me how you digitally paint? You get to choose. I'm not telling you what kind of paint you're trying to imitate, whether it's acrylic or watercolor or photorealism or oil. I'm simply going to show you different ways you can approach digital painting in your work. Now this artist makes these abstractions, these extreme abstractions, just using the colors. And then what's nice is they actually have the canvas texture coming through. So even texture overlays can become part of the digital painting. Now in traditional painting, if you're using oil or acrylic or some sort of additive paint material where you add your whites and blacks on top of a colored ground, and this is the most common type of speed painting, these are kind of the steps you'll see. You start with a sketch, but it's not refined line work. You build different tonal relationships on top of it, usually starting with your darkest darks first. Then you add some highlights, and then you work on the value range in between. You establish your local colors, and then you complement those local colors with complements in the shadows and in the highlights and going full spectrum. Exact same thing with digital painting. You might start with a sketch. You might start with a middle tone ground, fill in the local colors, and then start modifying the tones within those local colors until you get the final product. Though photorealism isn't the only thing we're aiming for. Now remember that this is digital coloring, but if you take all the line work away, you might have something that looks more like digital painting. And a lot of people like to practice their skills on just still lifes, like a piece of fruit. And then even though it's digitally painted, they might even paint swatches of different colors so they can easily select from themselves. And this might be the steps for that. Notice that the sketch gets totally overtaken by the painting. And then they apply that knowledge for all these different purposes. Sometimes even turning photos into things that look like paintings. So lots of different techniques, lots of different tastes. I'm making it a little bit tougher on you. Instead of just doing a digital painting of a still life object, I'm going to make you either do a caricature of a human, and that could be photorealistic or it can be cartoony, or painting head to toe of an animal. Again, it can be stylized in any way you want. And there's just no shortage of inspiration out there. Okay, let's get to it. So I'm going to choose to do a portrait this time. I did an animal last semester. And I like to do my favorite literary figures. So I thought this time I might do James Joyce, the writer of Ulysses, kind of an experimental prose writer. He's an interesting guy. There's not a lot of color photographs of him. And I always like to do portraits of people that are a little bit older because their faces will have more character. But I might also look at how other painters have approached him as a subject. So I don't like to work from just one piece of reference. I like to work from several, even if I'm just doing a simple cartoon. And so I want to find a portrait of him, an image of him that I can steal colors from maybe. But it also gives me a lot of sense of who the man was. So I'm liking this one. He looks a little awkward there, which I like. This one's pretty nice too. Doesn't matter what size they are because I'm going to be making my own image. Now, if I was going to choose to do an animal, I would do the same thing. I would pick a lot of potential images that maybe I'd composite together into the one I use. But I will create a reference folder. Now, James Joyce is too experimental an author to just paint in a straightforward photorealistic way. So I think I'm going to go a little bit bolder, crazier colors. And maybe I even want to be inspired by certain types of painting. I think this is actually a lovely example of one, just painted on top of a sketch. It has some imagery, it has some geography, some very bold colors. But I want to be maybe inspired by the colors of Expressionism. Maybe in particular, I want to look at the Blau-Reiter school and the work of Vasily Kandinsky. And even though Kandinsky did not do portraits, this is kind of what I picture when I think of the workings of James Joyce's mind. So this might be a good place to steal colors from and kind of the energy of the painting. Very fractured and energetic. So I'm going to steal a few of these too, and you'll see how they come in handy. And I love Kandinsky's sketches more than his finished paintings because they feel thin. His watercolors are beautiful. They feel less rigid. And I like his organic work more than his geometric work. So this is kind of the feeling of joy I want to get. So that's the style. But I'm going to use it to paint James Joyce. All right. So now I have all my references. What can I do with them? Well, let's get ourselves organized. This will be assignment 9. It's the last assignment that I grade for you before your final project. And now looking at all my reference, let's see. I think this will be the most interesting one to use. So I'm going to open that up with Photoshop. And because this photo is going to inspire my whole painting, I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to make the photo something I'm happier with. Going back to skills from the very beginning of class and just editing it. So I'm going to do Command J to duplicate it, and then I'm just going to do some simple adjustments. I'm going to adjust its midtones, brighten those up. See how he started to have cloudiness in one of his eyes. It's a little interesting. He's holding, looks like a spoon, or I don't know, maybe a monocle, magnify monocle, not sure. So I'm going to adjust it. Then I might adjust the color balance. This is obviously an old photo with too much magenta in it, so I can push the greens, push the cyans, push the yellows a little bit, and then in the shadows, maybe push the cools. And then in the highlights, maybe give the skin a little bit more warmth back. All right, and now I don't love that hand. I don't like the composition of the hand. I think I will leave the hand out of mine. So I might take this whole thing, rotate it a little bit, be more a traditional portrait. I'm going to end up distorting it a little bit. He has this nice long face, and I'm not trying to get something that's photorealistic. So this is the reference image I will use. And I am not so interested in his chair or his study. I'm more interested in just the shape of his head. I do like the repeated patterns of books behind him, though. So that might be something I can use. So I'm going to create a little new layer at the top, where I just mask out what I'm most interested in. Kind of focus my attention a little bit. And the reason I can do that as a new layer is then I can shrink it into him like that. And now I have a clearer picture of what I want. And then I can crop down to it. And in the same way, I can kind of paint out his hand.